Blake Shelton's mother froze, fork midair, eyes wide, because Miranda Lambert just said one word that changed everything.
I need you.
Gwen Stefani was sitting right there, watching, smiling, but her hands, they were shaking under that table. This wasn't a reunion. This wasn't closure. This was a collision between past and present, between the woman who knew Blake before fame and the woman who rebuilt him after heartbreak.
Can't go home again.
One dinner, 3 women, and a single word that made Blake walk outside alone for over an hour. Kelly Clarkson said she felt the tension from miles away. That's how thick it was.
I used to love you.
What Miranda whispered to Blake's mother at the door. Nobody was supposed to hear that, but we know. And once you hear it, you can't unhear it. This isn't gossip. This is family. This is roots. This is what happens when your past shows up at your present's dinner table. And what Blake did next? Nobody saw that coming.
Can't go home again.
Here's what you gotta understand. This wasn't some explosive confrontation. No screaming. No tears. No dramatic exit where someone storms out and slams the door. That would have been easier to process, honestly. What happened was quieter and somehow worse. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because to understand why one word could shake an entire room, you need to know what that ranch means, what those walls have witnessed, and why Miranda Lambert walking through that door was the last thing anyone expected that evening. Let me take you back a few hours. The Oklahoma sun was just starting to dip below the tree line. That golden hour light was spilling through the windows of Blake's family ranch. The kind of light that makes everything look softer, more forgiving, like maybe the past doesn't hurt quite as much as you remember. Blake's mother had been cooking since morning. This wasn't some catered Hollywood event with waiters and fancy plating. This was real food, the kind that takes hours, the kind that says, "I love you," without actually speaking the words out loud.
But somehow fall for me.
Gwen arrived early in the 1926 system, dressed down, trying to blend in. She'd been working on that for years now, learning the rhythms of Oklahoma life, the slower pace, the longer silences. The way people say things without actually saying them, you know what I mean? She helped set the table, arrange the flowers, made small talk about the weather and upcoming travel plans and all that safe stuff. Everything was calm, controlled, normal. But here's where it gets complicated. Nobody told Gwen that Miranda was coming. Nobody told Blake's mother either. At least, not officially. There are whispers that someone knew. That an invitation went out through back channels, through text messages and late-night calls, but those details stayed buried in phones nobody will ever see. What we do know is this. Around 7 in the evening, headlights appeared on that long dirt driveway. And when the car door opened, Miranda Lambert stepped out like she'd never left. Now think about that for a second. Miranda and Blake were married for 4 years. They lived on that land. They built memories in those rooms. They knew which floorboards creaked, which cabinets stuck, which corner of the porch caught the best breeze on a hot summer night.
I'm getting over her, the eyes have it, babe.
She's his wife. She's the mother figure to his stepchildren. She's the one who shows up at award shows holding his hand, the one who posts those cute couple photos on Instagram. But she wasn't there for the early years. She didn't see the struggling artist, the guy playing small venues for gas money. The version of Blake Shelton before fame polished all his rough edges and turned him into America's favorite country boy. Miranda saw all of that. And that's the part that makes this dinner different from every other celebrity encounter you've heard about. Because this wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't about competition or trying to prove something. It was about something deeper, roots. When Miranda walked into that ranch, she didn't just enter a building. She stepped back into a timeline, one where her fingerprints were still visible on the history of that place. You could almost feel it shift in the air. Blake's mother stood up immediately, not in shock, not in protest, just instinct. The way you greet someone your body remembers, even when your mind is still catching up.
Shouldn't be so scary. It was only
There's a difference between being welcomed somewhere and belonging there. Gwen was welcomed. She was always welcomed. Blake's family accepted her. They included her. They made space for her at the table. But belonging? That's something you can't fast track. It builds over years. Through storms that knock out the power for 3 days. Through dogs that run through fields. Through arguments and makeups and quiet mornings where nobody speaks because nobody needs to. Miranda had all of that with this family once. Gwen was still building it. And in that moment, as Blake's mother hugged Miranda just a little too long, everyone in the room felt the imbalance. Nobody said anything. Nobody had to. But you could feel it pressing down on everyone like humidity before a thunderstorm. The dinner table had 7 chairs. Only 6 were filled. But somehow it felt like there were more people in that room than anyone could count. Every memory, every shared laugh, every fight that never got resolved. They all sat invisible between the plates of food that nobody was really tasting anymore. Blake kept his head down mostly, cutting his steak, nodding at the right moments. But sources say his eyes kept drifting. To Miranda, to Gwen, to his mother. Like he was watching a movie he'd already seen but couldn't remember how it ended.
It was almost a year before
And here's the thing about Blake that people forget. He's a country boy at his core. Fame didn't change that. Hollywood didn't polish it away. When he's home in Oklahoma, he strips off the celebrity mask. He becomes the version of himself that existed before record deals and television contracts and all that noise. Miranda knew that version. She married that version. Gwen fell in love with the evolved one. The one who'd already been through the fire and came out wiser, more careful, more guarded with his heart. But that night at dinner, both versions were present, and they were colliding in ways nobody expected. Now let me tell you what Miranda did next, because this is where it gets really interesting. She didn't attack. She didn't compete. She did something far more powerful. She simply existed in a space that used to be hers, with a comfort that couldn't be faked or performed. When Blake's mother mentioned a storm from years ago that knocked out power for 3 days, Miranda laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, the kind that comes from actually being there, from living through it. I remember that, she said. We played cards by candlelight until 2 a.m. Blake cheated the whole time.
You better thank your lucky stars.
Of course she did. She's gracious, professional. She survived way worse than an awkward dinner. But there was something in her eyes that shifted. A recognition that she was hearing stories she'd never be part of. Memories she couldn't access no matter how many years she stayed. That's what hurt. Not Miranda's presence, but Miranda's history. Blake's mother kept the conversation moving. She talked about the ranch, the animals, how the fence on the east side needed fixing again. Normal family stuff. Safe topics that wouldn't blow up in anyone's face. But every now and then, she'd slip. She'd reference something from the past, and Miranda would nod like she was right there in the memory, while Gwen sat listening, learning, trying to find her footing in a house where someone else's footprints were already pressed deep into the floors. Here's where I need to tell you about Kelly Clarkson, because her name keeps coming up in this story for a reason. Kelly and Blake go way back. The voice, the friendship, the late-night conversations about love and loss, and everything messy in between. Kelly knows Blake maybe better than anyone outside his immediate family.
I will not break the way you did.
And Kelly? She's been through her own heartbreak, a divorce that played out in headlines, custody battles, public scrutiny. She knows what it feels like when your private pain becomes everyone's entertainment, when strangers think they have a right to your story. So when she heard about this dinner, she felt the tension from miles away. Her words, not mine. Because Kelly understands something most people don't. Divorce doesn't end relationships. It transforms them. The love might die. The connection rarely does, especially when families are involved. Especially when roots run that deep. Blake and Miranda don't have kids together, but they have something almost as binding. Shared history with his family, his mother, his land, his people. That doesn't vanish just because papers got signed. Now back to the dinner. Because something happened between the main course and dessert that changed everything. Miranda reached for a dish in the cabinet without asking where it was. Without hesitating or looking around confused. Her hand went straight to the right shelf, pulled out the exact plate she needed, like muscle memory that never forgot. Blake's mother watched her do it, and for a split second, her face softened, the way it does when you see someone who used to belong. Someone who once fit perfectly into the puzzle of your life before everything got complicated.
It was almost a year before
Gwen noticed. She had to. She's too smart not to. But she didn't react. She just adjusted. Her posture, her smile, the way she held her glass of sweet tea. Not defeated, not angry, just aware. Aware that she was sitting across from something she couldn't compete with. Because you can't compete with the past. You can only hope the present matters more. That today carries more weight than yesterday. And that's the question nobody asked out loud that night. But everyone was thinking it. Does the present matter more? Blake loves Gwen. Nobody doubts that. He chose her. He married her. He built a new life with her. But love isn't always about choosing, is it? Sometimes it's about layers, about chapters, about versions of yourself that live inside different people. Miranda holds a version of Blake that Gwen never met. Gwen holds a version that Miranda never knew. Both are real. Both are valid. But at that dinner table, only one of them felt like home. And that's exactly when Miranda said it. That one word that made everything stop. Home. She said it so casually, almost like she didn't realize the weight it carried. But she did. She had to. Miranda Lambert doesn't say things by accident. Every word is measured. Every pause is intentional, especially in moments like this. This place still feels like home. Blake's mother froze. And in that freeze, years of history came flooding back. Holidays, late nights, arguments, reconciliations. All of it compressed into one single moment of recognition. Gwen didn't flinch. That's what everyone remembers. When Miranda said home, Gwen kept her composure like a woman who's spent decades in the spotlight. She knows how to perform calm, even when everything inside is spinning. But her hands told a different story. She set down her fork, slowly, deliberately, and she folded her fingers together in her lap where nobody could see them, trembling. Not from fear, from recognition, the kind that hits you when you finally understand something you've been ignoring for years. She knew what she was walking into when she fell for Blake. A man fresh off a divorce. A man whose ex-wife was one of country music's biggest stars. A man whose family had already built years of memories with someone else. She knew all of that, and she chose him anyway. But knowing something in theory and feeling it at a dinner table, those are two very different things, aren't they? Here's what nobody tells you about being the second wife. You're always walking into rooms where someone else's ghost still lingers. Not haunting exactly, just present. In the photographs that haven't been replaced, in the stories that start with, remember when. In the way his mother's eyes drift sometimes like she's comparing without meaning to. Gwen has handled all of that with grace, for years. But that night felt different, because Miranda wasn't a ghost anymore. She was sitting right there, breathing the same air, laughing at memories Gwen would never share, reaching for dishes in cabinets like she still belonged. How dare you? I miss you. That word. Home. It kept echoing even after Miranda stopped speaking. Blake's mother tried to move the conversation forward. She asked about Gwen's music, about the kids, about upcoming projects and tour dates, normal stuff. Safe ground where nobody's feelings get hurt. But the air had already shifted. You could feel it pressing down on everyone. Now here's the part that really got people talking. About halfway through dessert, Blake excused himself, said he needed some air. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet exit through the back door like he was checking on something outside. Miranda watched him go. Gwen watched Miranda watch him go, and Blake's mother pretended not to notice either of them noticing. That's when the silence got heavy. 3 women sitting at a table, all connected to the same man, all holding different pieces of his story, and none of them saying what they were actually thinking.
You know I dream in color.
Kelly once said something about moments like this. She said the hardest part of divorce isn't the fighting, it's the quiet after. The moments when you realize your life has been divided into before and after, and you can't go back no matter how much you want to. Blake was living in that quiet, outside on the porch, hands in his pockets, staring at the same land he'd stared at 1,000 times before, but seeing it different now because Miranda's presence had stirred up something he thought was settled. Not love, not regret, something harder to name. Maybe it was just memory, the weight of who he used to be. The ghost of a younger Blake who made promises he couldn't keep, who loved hard and failed anyway, who thought forever actually meant forever until it didn't.
I need you.
Gwen excused herself too, but she didn't go to Blake. She went to the bathroom, closed the door, and stood there for a long moment looking at herself in the mirror. What was she seeing? We don't know for sure, but sources say when she came back out, her eyes were slightly red, not crying exactly, just full, like she'd been holding something back all night and finally let herself feel it. Miranda noticed. Of course she did, but she didn't say anything, just sipped her tea and waited for the evening to end. Here's the thing about Miranda Lambert that people misunderstand. She's not vindictive. She's not trying to reclaim territory or prove some point. She's just unapologetically herself. And sometimes that self includes places and people that technically don't belong to her anymore. She grew up in Texas, but Oklahoma became her home during those years with Blake. His family became her family. His land became her land. And divorce can't erase what the heart already memorized, you know?
I know they say you can't go home.
When Blake finally came back inside, something was different about him. Quieter, more thoughtful. Like he'd been having a conversation with himself out there that didn't have easy answers. He looked at Gwen first, smiled, reached for her hand under the table, reassuring her, choosing her, making sure she knew where he stood even if everything else felt uncertain. But then he looked at Miranda, and something passed between them that nobody else could translate. A language built over years, a shorthand that doesn't need words or explanations. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, maybe less. But Gwen saw it. And in that moment, she understood something important. She wasn't competing with Miranda the person. She was competing with Miranda the memory, the chapter, the timeline that existed before she ever entered the story. That's a battle nobody can win. Because you can't fight history. You can only hope to write enough new chapters that the old ones fade into background noise. But do they ever really fade? Blake's mother started clearing plates. The evening was winding down. Everyone could feel it. But the tension hadn't dissolved. It had just settled, like dust after a storm. And what came next? The goodbyes, the hugs, the carefully controlled exits where everyone performed normal even though nothing felt normal. But one moment stood out above everything else. One moment that insiders are still talking about weeks later, and it happened right at the front door. Miranda hugged Blake's mother. Not a quick embrace, a real one. The kind that lasts 3 seconds longer than polite. The kind where you close your eyes and remember every version of the person you're holding. And Blake's mother whispered something. Just 2 words, quiet enough that only Miranda heard them. I know. That's it, 2 words. But they carried the weight of everything unsaid all evening. Every memory, every comparison. Every moment of tension that nobody acknowledged out loud. Miranda nodded, pulled back, smiled that bittersweet smile people wear when they're leaving something behind, but not really letting go.
You shouldn't spend your whole life wishing.
Then she turned to Gwen. And this is where it got interesting, because Gwen could have been cold. She could have been territorial. She had every right to make this moment uncomfortable, but she didn't. She extended her hand first, then pulled Miranda into a hug that surprised everyone, including Miranda. Thank you for coming, Gwen said, and she meant it. You could hear it in her voice. Not sarcasm, not performance, just genuine acknowledgement, because Gwen understood something important in that moment. Miranda wasn't the enemy, she was just part of Blake's story. A chapter that happened before Gwen's name ever appeared on the page. And you can't hate someone for existing in a timeline you weren't part of.
Whatever happened to you? I thought you loved
Miranda left first. Engine started. Headlights disappeared down that long dirt driveway, and the house exhaled like it had been holding its breath all night. Blake stood at the window watching until the taillights faded completely. Gwen stood beside him, not touching, just present, giving him space to feel whatever he needed to feel. You okay? She asked quietly. Blake nodded, but he didn't look at her when he answered, and that told her everything she needed to know. He wasn't okay, not completely, but he would be. Eventually, once the dust settled and the echoes stopped bouncing around his head, Blake's mother went to bed without saying much, just kissed them both on the cheek and disappeared into her room, leaving Blake and Gwen alone in a house full of ghosts that only one of them could see.
Or she called him up.
And this part comes from someone close to the situation. Someone who has no reason to lie or exaggerate. Blake and Gwen sat on that porch for over an hour, not talking much, just sitting, listening to the Oklahoma night sounds, the crickets, the distant highway, the wind moving through trees that have stood there longer than any of them have been alive. And finally, Gwen asked the question she'd been holding all night. Do you still love her? Blake didn't answer right away. Not because he was hiding something, but because he was trying to find words for something complicated, something that doesn't fit into yes or no. I love who we were, he said eventually. I love what we built, but I don't love who we became. Does that make sense? Gwen nodded. Because it did make sense. Perfect sense, actually. You can love a memory without wanting to live in it. You can honor history without being trapped by it. That's the difference between nostalgia and regret.
But piece by piece, you collected me up.
And that's the truth nobody wants to admit about Blake Shelton's love life. It's not a competition between Miranda and Gwen. It's not a question of who's better or who fits more naturally into his world. It's about chapters. About versions of himself that live inside different relationships. Miranda knew the hungry version. The one still chasing dreams, still figuring out who he'd become, still believing that love could conquer anything if you just tried hard enough. Gwen knows the settled version. The one who's already been broken and rebuilt. Who's learned what matters and what doesn't. Who knows that love isn't about intensity. It's about choosing each other on the boring days. Both versions are real. Both deserve space in his story. But only one gets to write the future. And Blake chose Gwen for that. Not because Miranda failed, not because history doesn't matter, but because sometimes you need someone who knows the evolved you. The you that survived the fire and came out wiser. Kelly Clarkson said something once that fits here perfectly. She said the strongest relationships aren't built on never being broken. They're built on choosing each other even after you've been shattered. On seeing all the pieces and still saying yes. Blake has been shattered. twice. 2 divorces. 2 failures that played out in headlines and tabloids. 2 versions of forever that didn't last past a few years. But he chose to try again. With Gwen. And that takes courage. That night at the ranch didn't end in drama. There were no slammed doors. No shouting matches. No tears or accusations flying across the table. Just a quiet recognition that the past and present can coexist. That you can honor what was without sacrificing what is. Blake's mother went to sleep that night thinking about 2 women. Both good. Both important. Both connected to her son in ways that shaped him into who he is. Gwen went to sleep knowing she'd survived something she'd been dreading for years. Meeting Miranda on her home turf. Walking into a space where someone else's history lived in every corner. And discovering that Miranda wasn't a monster. Just a woman who loved the same man. In a different time. In a different way. And Blake? He stood outside a little longer after Gwen went to bed. Looking at the stars. Thinking about roots and wings. About staying and leaving. About who you were and who you're becoming. Because that's what home really means. It's not just geography. It's not just the place you grew up or the house you bought. It's the space between who you were and who you are. The bridge between memory and future. Miranda said home and meant the ranch, the land, the history, the version of Blake she knew. But Blake realized something that night. Home isn't a place you return to. It's a person you build with, day after day, choice after choice. And he'd been building with Gwen for years, slowly, carefully, creating something new on top of old foundations. That doesn't erase what came before, but it honors what comes next. So when fans ask whether Blake still has feelings for Miranda, the answer is complicated. Of course he does. Not romantic feelings, but connection, history, the kind of bond that survives divorce because it was forged in the version of yourself that can't be erased. But feelings and choices are different things. And Blake chose Gwen, not just that night, but every morning after, every moment when the past whispers and the present stands waiting. That's what matters.